I knew even through those darkest times that he loved me.
Go show up. It's not that hard.
It's fun as well because I kind of get to see the Father's heart. I get to see God's heart towards me.
Because children are amazing observers and poor interpreters.
I have a good relationship with my boys, but I long for fellowship with my boys, okay?
Show up, be there, try, have a backbone.
This is how you hold a snake so that it doesn't bite you.
I wish I was perfect, but I am not.
If I haven't been on my hands and knees wrestling, playing in the yard, on the trampoline, they need it.
Time really does fly by faster than you think.
Time is the language that they speak.
Her last words to me after I said, "Mom, I love you," she said to me, "I know. I know." And, I hope as a dad, I hope as a parent that my children know that.
Welcome to the Mick Pat Show. I'm Mick.
I'm Pat.
And we are starting a series here about fatherhood. And if you listen to this one, this is going to be likely the second episode. So go ahead and catch our intro episode where we're explaining our whole point in wanting to do a series on fatherhood. And hopefully that kind of brings you up to speed with why we have our guest here. Our guest is Carl. Go ahead, Carl, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Carl.
And Carl here is one of our first guests on this series. And he has what we like to believe is just a unique experience with his father growing up. And we'd love to learn from him how that's impacted how he himself is raising his children and his fatherhood. So with that, thanks for coming along. And we're going to probably just hop right on into Carl. You can really just give us a synopsis, of, what it was like your relationship with your father, and then, kind of how long you've been a father now. And nothing has to be grandiose or anything like that. We don't want it to feel like this has to be a story of proving anything. Mm. It's more just for people to kind of know where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. And so then also so it can let us know topics to kind of start moving into and questions to ask. So really it's up to you wherever you want to start, but I would encourage probably starting with, what it was like growing up with your dad.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. What is it? Long time listener, first time caller, of course.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Growing up with my dad, I have a kind of an interesting yet really normal experience. I feel like in our country today, it's just my dad was in the military. He was in a pretty specific position in the military, and that kind of took a lot of his time and effort and really his soul in a lot of ways. And so when he was 4, when I was 4, he just kind of disappeared. And then I had a stepfather come into my life when I was about 6. And then he became my stepfather when I was like 8 or 9-ish. And now my relationship with my dad is my biological father starting to grow again, starting to percolate now that I have my own baby girl. And yeah, pretty
awesome.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, Pat, I'm just going to kind of sit back a little bit and let you kind of start digging in on the question front here. I figure we just kind of go chronologically.
For sure. Yeah. So you mentioned when you were 4, kind of things changed.
Mm-hmm.
What's your first memories you have of your dad?
And
I guess, do you remember much before that time?
I don't remember a ton, to be honest. I remember very specific times. My grandparents, my dad's parents, lived out in South Carolina and Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was 3 or so going out there to visit them. And that was a time that we traveled out there with my dad. But even when we got there, he went and hung out with my 5 uncles. So didn't really have like a lot of interaction, I suppose, before I was really starting to grow.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that was just kind of like, I have two blood brothers, a half brother and a stepsister. And so my 2 blood brothers were along the ride with me during that process. And, that was just wild. I mean, wild looking back at the one memory I do clearly remember, which I've talked to my therapist about it 1,000 times, is the night that my dad actually left. Like that, to me, I just remember so vividly watching that all go down and watching my dad leave and my mom cry and like all these different things. You know, every kid who's watched a parent go through the divorce knows this story, right? It's tale as old as time. But that was probably like the first like real memory I had of my dad that I can really truly look back and cement it in my memory. But yeah.
So it sounds like it was pretty quick then, like literally overnight, in a sense. I mean, obviously there was in the marriage
a lot of build up in the
marriage. In the marriage,
Yeah.
there's build up and stuff, but from like a 4-year-old's perspective,
Yeah.
it was like dad, no dad, you know, more or less, or like, or dad's not around anymore, and he's mentioned he had a specific job in the military, and this would have been at a time when our country was in the thick of or maybe leading up to
The Gulf War.
to the Gulf War
Yeah.
then at that time. So
Yeah. And that actually really contributed to like, not to get into my parents' stuff because that's, that's for them. But that contributed a lot to who my dad has become, and especially when I was a kid, just as very distant. He was a ghost. I mean, he was a Navy SEAL, so I'm not like, we don't need to beat around the bush. He was a Navy SEAL. He was a Navy SEAL for 13 years. He was a squad commander. And during that time, I don't really know what happened. Like my mom has tried to express it to me. My mom has always been so good at like trying to, especially as kids, really trying to open up the past for us to communicate with our dad, trying to understand his past, really trying, because she didn't want us to, even though we had Brian, my stepfather, who was truly, I refer to him as my dad. And I still love my biological father, but I just felt like with his role in that time, he was gone all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So even when he left, that to me was like, he wasn't really there anyways. I don't want to say like, because again, now looking back and having a therapist and all this fun stuff, and now that I'm an adult, like understanding a lot of what he was going through and understanding like the political climate, like you mentioned, Pat, like that to me is, something that's such a big contributor and so much of like, especially with us, like we're all kind of in the same age group.
Well, I mean, like, I'm kind of
Careful.
still young.
Careful.
it's pre-30 over here.
I wasn't alive during the Gulf War, so
Yeah, but your parents, your parents were, I'm sure there was strife in their teenage lives.
Oh, okay, all right.
But it's kind of crazy now, like looking at, what I've brought a kid into, right? Like this idea of our childhood is kind of really revolved around tragedy in a lot of ways. Most of our really formative years have literally circled around strife and chaos and tragedy. And when you really separate it and you pull back and you look at every other generation in American, maybe even world history, it's all the same. It's always tragedy and chaos, and that's human nature. So there was a fear before I even had a kid, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping around and what you guys want to cover, but there was a fear I had before having a kid that I told my wife. We were married for 7 years before we had my daughter. And I told her maybe in like year 3 or 4, and we had the baby talk when we were dating and when we were engaged and all that fun stuff. But I told her, I was like, I don't think I want to have a kid. Just like straight, like looking at what's going on, just watching our world, just like it felt like and still feels like our world year after year just descends like deeper and deeper into like this unknown chaos. And then again, if you look at it in hindsight, it's like,
It's always been chaos.
this is the world, dude. This is what humans do to each other.
Yeah.
Smoke break.
Smoke break.
Hey, Ken, it's Mick, and I've got something important to talk about. We all hope we never find ourselves in a self-defense situation, but life's unpredictable. Enter the National Self-Protection Plan from Attorneys on Retainer, an actual credible law firm you can put on retainer for your self-defense needs. For just $35 a month, you get national coverage in all 50 states for criminal and civil legal representation in self-defense situations, complete with a 24/7, 365 toll-free emergency line. That's real legal support when you need it most. What's in the package? Bail bonds, scene cleanup, firearm replacement, even mental health counseling. Plus, 0 fees for a laundry list of defense-related costs like expert witnesses. So support the show and get yourself some peace of mind. Click the link in our show notes or visit our sponsors page to sign up for the National Self-Protection Plan from Attorneys on Retainer.
Hey folks, Pat here. If you're like Mick and I, you're a fan of classic tales like Lonesome Dove, Blood Meridian, The Three-Body Problem, and Steinbeck's East of Eden. With Audible, you can dive into these epic stories anytime, anywhere. Sign up for a free month, and your first audiobook is on the house. To start your free trial and support our show, click the link in the show notes or swing by the sponsors page on our website.
Want an awesome website for your podcast? Check out Podpage. We use it for the Mick Pat Show, and it's a game changer. Set it up in minutes, no coding needed. Support the show by using our link to get started. Your podcast deserves a home as great as ours. Podpage, the one-stop solution.
Always feels apocalyptical, depending on, like, you can take anybody from any slice of history, and there were people who were like, it's the end,
Yeah.
you know, and then it kept on spinning
Except for the Roaring 20s. Everyone was like, this is the best.
until the,
Yeah, until they started killing themselves.
Yeah, until the Depression. Then it was
Yeah.
like,
It's
this
like,
is
this
the
is
end.
no longer the best.
Mhm.
Man, do you guys remember just like 4 years ago? This was
was-
the best.
It was a good time.
Flappers.
Mhm.
Who could forget?
Anywho, yeah, no worries about jumping around and all that. You know, this is really, you know, your story. We're just here to kind of dig into it. I do have a question, just kind of from your perspective, you know, of what you can remember. You know, you said your father left when you were 4, right?
In that area,
Ish,
yeah.
ish. And then it wasn't until you were like 7 or 8 that your stepfather came into the picture.
He kind of started coming into the picture when I was, I think, like 6.
Okay, gotcha.
6-ish, and then they were married. They got married. I mean, especially when you're that age and there's a lot of kids involved. It's kind of like, we know what we know and we know what we've got, and this is good. So let's get married. So it wasn't like it wasn't a long extended dating experience for my parents.
Gotcha. My question in regards to that is, even though you might not remember a lot about your dad, was there a warm-up period with your stepfather where you were like, oh, he's doing that differently than my dad did it, like than what I'm used to? Because it's like that weird, you know, like you might not have that memory, but you might remember feeling that way about your stepfather.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And so I'm just kind of wondering, as someone who's kind of had that experience with 2 fathers, and you have now, you know, you've said you love them both. You
very
think
much,
You look
yeah.
up to them both. What was that like as a kid, having that, like, having to warm up to your stepdad and like realizing he's going to do things different and he's
Mhm.
going to be around?
Bro, what a great question. You know what? And this is kind of like, this kind of solves the, you know, who has it easier and who has it tougher, like the oldest sibling, the middle sibling, or the youngest.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in a lot of circumstances, I catch hate as the youngest sibling from my siblings
Mhm.
that I had it easy. And I try to explain to them, like, no, once you guys were all gone, you have no idea how much our parents dialed in on me.
Mhm.
Like, you have no, like, I try, but all that being said, the weight that specifically my eldest brother and the weight that specifically my eldest brother and my middle brother were carrying during that time, and even my stepsister, having been basically literally an only child
Mhm.
before joining our family. And she's, a few years older than all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And watching all of them have to shoulder that weight of them remembering how my dad acted.
Yeah.
Them remembering how life was before my sister's mom was out of the picture. They had something to strive and to try to like pull back, like try to get back.
Mm-hmm.
I never did.
Mhm.
I always, but being the youngest, I was fiercely loyal to my siblings,
Mhm.
still am today. And that loyalty basically also meant that I would follow in lockstep with, what they thought or what they did. So my rebellion was outward, but internally I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't feel it.
Yeah, it's kind of, I get what you're saying. I don't have, blood siblings or anything like
Mhm.
that, but I get what you're saying. And it's like the idea of like, as the youngest, we're like, okay, so we're mad at him today.
Mhm.
Okay. I don't know why, but
Just
everyone's
wanna
mad.
check,
So
yeah.
we don't like him today. But then it's just like, oh, so he's cool now? Okay. So,
Okay.
all right, he's cool now, I guess. Like,
So real, dude.
and I feel like I've seen that amongst other people who were like, the youngest sibling, are just like, I don't know why, but
We're along for the ride.
yeah, exactly.
We're along for the ride, dude. That's such a good, like, it seriously is that. It's every day checking in on who are we cool with today? Oh, we are? Gotcha. Wait, we're in a fight with mom? Great. I'm here.
I don't know why.
I don't know
What
why,
are we
but
fighting about?
I'm all over it.
I've always heard I haven't always. I just remember very specifically this friend of mine said being the youngest sibling is just being Brick from Anchorman.
Oh, yeah.
I was just like, and I like, as someone, I'd never been the youngest sibling, but after hearing that, I was like, oh, I get it. That's such a good analogy. Like that helps me 100% understand what they're talking about.
Oh my gosh.
Loud
That
noises.
sounds specifically like a joke made by a middle child.
Yeah.
It's just so
Are you offended by that?
I'm like a
I don't
little
like
offended. Like just I'm like right on the
Mhm.
corner of,
That was
unhinged.
what the youngest child told me. He's like, if you want to know what it's like, that's really what it's like.
They could care less what you do.
Mm.
I mean, honestly, like especially going through that time with the transition of, my stepfather coming in. Just it was really funny to watch my very intelligent older sibling strategically push his buttons, strategically set him up in, unwinnable circumstances
And instigate stuff.
all the time.
Mm.
And my middle sibling was just a brawler. Just out there for blood. He didn't care. He was just, I just don't like you straight up. And I'm going to tell you that I don't like you.
Yeah.
There was one situation that was, and this is a lot how I've actually framed my parenting that I learned from my stepdad at a very young age. I think I was 9 or 10. I grew up in a very mountainous region. And in this region, a lot of people ski. And so we went up skiing as a family, and it was my first time ever skiing. And my stepfather is a farm boy. I can teach myself. I don't need a class. Get up on the mountain, figure it out. It's super natural if you just let your body do it. I'll show you. You're safe.
Mm-hmm.
Just get out there and do it. And I remember we just went, I did it one green, and he loads me up and this was kind of the cool thing to kind of go back. My stepfather's temperaments and his theory on life and work is very similar to my father.
Oh, really? Okay.
So that very much like the Navy SEAL mind and the farm boy mind are very similar. Very similar.
Okay.
And so we didn't have a lot of transitional stuff that way, but we're on the mountain. We go up to the top of this really famous mountain where we're from, and there's a really famous blue on it. And my dad throws me on it, and he goes in front of me. He's right behind me. He's got me. And we get to this part that just is a sheer drop for 10 feet. Nothing bad. It's just like all you got to do is point the tips. You're good to go. Just let it roll real quick, and you just pick up quick speed, right? That's how you would look at it if you were not a 8 or 9 year old little boy.
Mhm.
And it was terrifying to me. And So my dad skied down. I was crying at the top saying I didn't want to go down. I'm not going to come down. I'm not going to come down. He duck walks back up this little hill, coaches me up, says it's going to be okay. I'm screaming at him this whole time. The whole time I'm screaming at him, which as a parent now, when my daughter, who has, I think, she's never really screamed at me in public, but she's screamed at me when I've had company over.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like no, I don't want to eat this broccoli or whatever, you know, kids say. And so I popped her one real quick. And no, I'm just playing. I get embarrassed by that.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have all these people skiing past us, and it's very clear we don't look the same, by the way.
What do you mean?
My dad is
your biological or your stepfather?
My biological father is dark as night.
Okay, gotcha.
My stepfather is as light as day. And, you know, 3 little Africans skiing down a mountain. Sounds like the start to a country song. Not a good country song.
I was like, I don't know if I've heard that one. Is that
Morgan Wallen? If you're listening, don't make that country song. So he goes back down one more time, and finally he duck walks up. And as he's duck walking up, I'm saying, "Stop! Go away! You're not my dad."
Oh, wow.
And then I got into the whole little kid, you're not my dad, which again, I had learned from my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
#older siblings ruin everything. And I'm screaming this at him as he's climbing up the mountain to help me down.
Gosh.
And he helps me down. We get to the bottom. He settles me and he's like, okay, you good? Do you feel better? How about we go try it again? And we get right back to the bottom of the mountain. We go right back up that chairlift and go down the hill. And I just like, even now with my daughter, that has influenced the man I want to be as I parent, as I raise this little girl, especially in this world, right? So that was the most long, drawn out way to touch on a question. But
that was great, dude.
It's a great question.
It was, and I feel like I've seen that even when I snowboarded, like, you know, like seeing that interaction between an incredibly patient parent or uncle or whatever, and then just a kid who's bloody murder, like
not having it.
You have to throw me down, like, right? And that the patience, and you see it both, like you see the impatient parents, and then you see like the ones that really are like, it's more important that they learn this and learn that they can trust me than I shut them up and people stop seeing us, like,
because I'm a
like
little embarrassed.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I struggle with that, being like embarrassed, you know, in public, especially in public. I think that shows like humility your dad had to, like, in that moment, like, there's no way that didn't bruise him. You know what I mean? Like, so like, I mean, even it doesn't matter who you are, that it hurts to hear that from a kid who you're like, no, you don't even know how much you're my son now. Like, cause I married your mom. I took on like 3 kids.
Yeah.
I took on 3 kids. I, like, you know, I'm here for you. I'm taking you skiing today. Like, and everything in between. Like,
I'm not the stepdad. I'm the dad who stepped up.
Exactly. And so his reaction to that could have been, he could have gone 2 different ways with it. You know, like, it'd be very easy and just in your like ego and manness to be like, all right, well, you're not going to die. So find me, if you find me down in the lodge, I'll be having some nachos, you know, and just boogie on down all the way over to what his response, which was to, you know, basically put himself underneath the, you know, take the bruising and take a chance to instill a life lesson that he didn't know in the moment that would be something that'd be being talked about years down the road. But
I just thought of the most millennial saying for a dad, based off what you're saying. Take the bruise, not the L. You know, don't take that L. Just take the bruise. You know, take your licks while you can. Kids are assholes because they don't know what else to do. Like, they are tiny little humans. I was explaining this to my wife, how I view children, because she commended me on being really calm during a nighttime situation with my daughter when she was really young. And I was like, honestly, the way I look at it is like, imagine if you went to a tribe in South America that has never met any outsiders and you plucked one of them out real quick and you planted them in a house with a family in the middle of white suburban America.
Connecticut.
You are heels deep in Connecticut. Okay.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, Lordy, Lordy, Lordy. Oh, man. Which I have a lot of family lives in Connecticut. So maybe I shouldn't. But yeah, true. Anyways, yeah, I was trying to explain to her. I was like, imagine if you did that. That's what a baby's doing, except they have zero prior knowledge before you did that. They have no tools to help. So for me, like even watching my daughter, I'm like, you're 3 years into this. You're talking. You're having very conscious thought. You're doing a lot of cool stuff, but you have no direction for it yet. You have no self-awareness. And how are you going to know anything other than, what a little animal would if they were trying to be raised by a bunch of humans, right?
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah. I have another question too. And again, I think a lot of these questions are going to be, Pat and I trying to make sure we really do take the opportunity of each of the guests' unique backgrounds.
Yeah.
Because even though I don't have anything similar in my childhood that I can really think of, I do think about, growing up in the, 90s, early 2000s, there had to be times, especially once your stepdad was in the picture and stuff, and he's been in that picture ever since. There had to be times outside of just that time on the mountain where you felt a choice, or maybe you saw him make a choice to embrace, this is my son. We don't look alike. And like there was probably people around who said things or looked or acted in a certain way or like looked. And I was just wondering, like, for someone who's had that experience where, I'd imagine spent a lot of time in public with your stepfather. And maybe it's something that you've gotten used to and like you don't even really think much about it. But like I'm really wondering, like, what was that like as a kid, if you can think of times where it was just like you got to see him handle the people's looks or the people's comments, even if there are things that like maybe you weren't thinking of just because you're a kid with a kid's mind.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, if you can see that like now from the frame of an adult and see like the times where he made those choices.
Yeah. So many in particular, because our parents are fantastic. My mom is my hero. My dad is also my hero. I mean, they're both just really swell human beings. But my dad just taught us to laugh at it. My stepdad taught us to laugh at it. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like for him, it was just like, I don't know. We used to, and I know this is before we knew anything, but we used to listen to a lot of Bill Cosby with him.
Oh yeah.
Like it was like, we turned it on. We just listened to Bill. Like to me, that was the first time I really started to see like a comedic bone in my dad and my stepdad. But really the biggest thing was football.
Oh yeah.
We would go to so many football games together, still do to this day. We go to, I mean, I don't know how you guys want to keep this podcast, but I'll just, I'm a huge Denver Broncos fan. DB till I die. And we've been season ticket holders since, the 80s or something like that.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And we've been going to games since I was a kid. My first game was when I was 6. I was the kickoff kid at a Broncos game. And, it was funny because my stepdad introduced me to professional football and I was locked in. I loved it. That's where we bonded. We bonded going to games. We bonded talking about it. We bonded through sport. And my other 2 siblings in particular had a harder time bonding because they just didn't have many things in common, with this farm boy from Windsor, Colorado.
Sure, yeah.
Like, to me, it was like football was life. I connected that with my stepfather. He became my dad relatively quickly. But the first time I actually referred to him as my dad in a public setting with him there, it was really powerful for me because we were with some like pretty deep family to us. And some like on my mom's side. So folks that have been in our family for a long time, they had known my biological father, like people that were kind of still new to my stepfather in a lot of ways. And I just remember there was a guy who asked, like, we flew out to go watch the Broncos play the Raiders in Oakland and in the Coliseum. And a guy asked us when we were in because we stayed in San Francisco, because we were no jamooks back then staying in Oakland. It's a clean place now, but back then it was not so clean.
It's probably better than San Francisco. Probably safer now.
I mean, they kind of switch.
Yeah,
they go back and forth once a decade. And this guy asked, he was like, how are you with the crew? Because I'm with this like group of 5 white dudes.
Yeah.
And I'm a kid. And my stepfather turns to me and he goes to answer. And I was like, oh, this is my dad. This is my great uncle. This is like all the people I was with. And I'm named after my great uncle. So it was very much like, he's very much like tied to me. And it just, in that moment, just felt like it felt like I got the opportunity as like this little kid. I was probably like 15, 16 to induct my dad into our family that way. Even though he had been around since the 90s, he had already been there. He already knew all these guys. It was just that moment for me where I was like, man, I just referred to him as my dad. This is wild.
How old were you?
Probably 16.
Gotcha. Do you remember the first time he kind of took ownership of you without it being like a clause, like where it wasn't like, this is my stepson? Do you remember the first time when he was like, this is my boy, or this is my son, and like how you felt? Because I have had that feeling where a step parent took ownership of me in a situation, and I was like, hold up, maybe like like where like I didn't say that out loud, but like in my head I had like the internal conflict of like, I'm not really your kid, and I don't know if I feel like I don't know if I liked you. Like,
don't you take my agency away?
It was kind of weird, and granted I was like probably a middle schooler or something like that, maybe elementary school when I had that feeling.
Really feeling some type of way.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, I know how I felt at times, and I'm just wondering like how you felt. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who have had that step parent. And when that happened, when that step parent is like, this is my boy. And they're like, I feel like it's different for a lot of people. I'm wondering, like, do you remember when that was?
Yeah, even when I was a kid, when my siblings were out of the house and I didn't have that extra pressure, in that time frame.
Oh yeah.
So I was, just high school, because he had done it before, and I had that same feeling of like,
yeah,
come on, no, you're not. And he really tested. He didn't test the boundaries. He didn't test the limits. He understood like if something was going to be accepted by us. Like he got really good at reading us quick, which again, a credit to his, not only the man he is, but his ability to read a human. But I remember, I can't remember this exact situation because it wasn't as impactful because it had kind of happened before, but we were at a Christmas party with my parents, and I think it was a girl that I knew for a long time. And he was like, oh yeah, this is my son. And I was just like, yeah, all right, I'm cool with that. And the competition from my biological father had kind of died down by that point in time in my life.
Sure.
But it was pretty hefty there for a while.
Yeah.
Like the battle of the dads. My stepdad didn't give a flying F word about it, but my biological dad sure did for an amount of time.
Yeah. So you were just talking about that time when you were in kind of that 15, 16-year-old stage. And I think that's kind of a point in our life when we start to kind of make our own way in the world, get a little more independence. And that's a time when, like, I know at least for me, and I know lots of other fellas, you can start to also butt heads with your dad as you like get closer to separating out. And so I want to talk some about that, but then also with that is, so now you're 15, 16 years old. At this point we're into Afghanistan, Iraq. So like, it was your dad involved in a little bit of that?
In the very beginning.
So during that time, during this time, he's been gone a lot still. Like even if he was just for his work alone, he was gone a lot. And then on top of that, you were living with a different family. And did you live with your biological dad ever during this time? No. So like you were like, at this point, what was your like feeling around your biological father at this stage in your life? Not where you've come to now, but like during this time, this like high schooler trying to find your way in the world. You know, you have a really like on paper cool dad, but you know, like who's like, yeah, my dad's a Navy SEAL. You know, like that's cool as hell.
Dope,
you know, but then it's also like, but I maybe don't know him necessarily a lot more than that. Like, so you have like awesome dad on paper and hasn't been around as much as maybe as a boy would want. So what, at this point in your life, when you're maturing, growing up, you're kind of seeing the world, understanding more and more, what sorts of emotions were going on for you at this point in time?
I mean, it was such a weird time, because you're right. Like, that's so like a lot of that time period is really formative stuff that you're going through, and you're trying to figure out a lot. You're trying to talk about a lot. You're, you know, dating girls that you want to introduce your dad to and all that fun stuff. But that was a weird time for me because, one, both of my dads are very into football. My biological father was an insane athlete in college. He was an All-American. He was an insane athlete. And at this point in time in high school, I was actually a pretty darn good athlete myself, even as like a sophomore. But I was starting to make a name for myself, and I was starting to get varsity looks, and it was just, things were on the up and up. So I figured that, you know, my dad would come around a little bit more, and that we'd have a little bit more often like communication. But it was more of, you know, he showed up. One memory that I have that has kind of stuck with me is I had a game, didn't really play my best. It was against, you know, some Denver school. I still had like, I think I had a touchdown and like maybe like 25 yards rushing. I was a fullback, so I wasn't supposed to get the ball a lot, but I really hadn't played to my ability. I hurt my shoulder in the first half. And so I was like, my dad's at this game. He didn't come to a lot of games. So the ones that he was at, my biological father, because my stepdad was at every game, you know, but the ones that he was at, I was like, I got to show out. He had one game that he came to when I was a senior that I think it was the best game I've ever had in my life. I had over 100 yards rushing. I had like 3 touchdowns. It was like, for a fullback, I was like, man, I am doing, somebody's living right. And it might be me.
Yeah.
But he was at this specific game, and I had hurt my shoulder, and I should have come out of the game, but I was like, no. Like,
this is the playoffs, man. This is Disneyland.
This is Disneyland. And it was like
here.
week 3 of the season.
Yeah, exactly.
And so actually during the game, after I had gotten hurt, end of the first quarter, you meet with your team, defense runs out there. He was sitting in the stands, like right behind the bench. So I turn, I run across the track. I come up to him, and he's like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, yeah, I'm doing all right. Really, really hurt my shoulder. And his first reaction was like, well, I mean, what have you been doing for lifts in the gym? You shouldn't be hurting your shoulder. And I was like, never mind. Why would I even, I'm totally, no, I'm fine. I'm good. But what came with that in my life at that point in time, because of the cool status my dad had at that point in time growing up in middle school. Like, if you can tell anybody in SF, anybody that's a SEAL, if you can tell your little middle school friends about that, they think you're the shit. Right. Yeah. And that is like,
oh, your dad can beat my dad.
Literally nobody got into that competition with me.
Yeah.
Nobody got into the whose dad could kick whose dad's ass, because we all knew it would be my dad. And my dad's in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame as well, separate from the Navy SEALs.
Dang.
But with that in middle school, to me, I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know about the relationship with my mom and my dad. She was, again, very careful about sharing that with us, because she wanted us to have a good light of our father. My mom, that is. Again, another reason why my mom's a freaking saint.
Yeah.
But during that time period of middle school, you know, growing up, I didn't know much. When I got to high school and I started to learn, when I started to grow up, when I started to realize that, oh, this is not what I thought it was. Like, maybe my dad just like straight up isn't showing up because not because he doesn't like me, just because maybe he just doesn't know I really exist. Like the thoughts in my head. So then the lying started, because the lying came from trying to lie to myself that my dad was a cooler guy than he was. Trying to ride that, oh, your dad's in the Navy SEAL. No, he's cool. Like, he's a cool guy. Because again, at this point in time, I've gone through so many peaks and valleys of trying to, decipher whether my dad was like a good dad or not, right? Which I know he wasn't a good dad, and he would tell you he wasn't a good dad. And I think he is starting to come to grips with that himself, which is actually helping my siblings and I's relationship with him as it starts to grow and expand and become more consistent. Because there was time periods growing up where I didn't talk to him for a year or so, So it's not like, and even when I did talk to him, he'd call, it was like, he'd call in like, a different month or the same month as my birthday and have no idea what was happening. In fact, I'm convinced to this day, he still has no idea what day my birthday is. And you shovel that stuff down deep when you're 16, 17, you dig it in deep. You don't want to talk about that stuff with your high school buddies.
Right.
Like I'm trying to play ball and get girls. Like that was my focus in high school. And then I got to college and everything changed the second week I was there. It was like, I met my wife, Broomhilda, and Broomhilda literally has altered and structured the foundation of what I had lost with my dad into recreating who I see myself as a man and as a father. So, and I think this is really cool that you guys are doing this series. And I think it's really cool that you're focusing on this, because there's so many spaces in our culture where men are kind of like, now shut the fuck up. Like, we don't want to hear from you right now. But in this circumstance in particular, and the importance of a man being in the house, and the importance of, or at least a male figure, or somebody who is giving that kid a sense of stability outside of the matriarch of the family, because they are in very, very plain words, very different roles, no matter who is playing that role. And to me, it is my opinion and my belief that if you are going to raise a child at all, your first step is find a partner that you can raise that child with. Find a partner that you can raise that child with, meaning that child can be a part of your relationship and not the other way around. That child is somebody that you have the privilege to raise, but first you cultivate your marriage, you cultivate your relationship, because without that relationship and you staying stable with your child and the consistency that a child needs to be raised to be a high functioning individual in a lot of people's theories, even though I came up just fucking fine. In a lot of studies, it just goes to show that you need to have some sort of stability and consistency with a dual family, with a dual parent role. It just works better. And it's my thought that if you're going to do that, you have to have a partner that you can do that with. And I feel like so much of this like dad talk and talking about like what I have done is in no way measurable to what my wife has instilled in me or has brought out of me. That was so much deeper. Yeah.
Appreciate that, man.
That's good.
It's kind of weird because that's almost a hot take, but to like Pat and I, that's such a cold take. Like we're just like, yeah, duh.
Yeah.
That's obvious.
It's like, this is last week's potatoes. What are we doing here?
Every day, like the rest of America, I feel like is going to hear this, and just be like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. That's a little spicy, and people are going to be with it. And I just think like, oh, that's just the most basic formula to starting out right with like, giving a kid a good footing.
Yeah. And to me, it's like, and you can, in my opinion, I am an American citizen and I think you should be free to do whatever the hell you want because you live in America. And that's kind of what we are supposed to be about. However, the thought process around the family is you can structure your family any way you want. You can have 2 moms, 2 dads, to non-binary parents, whatever you want to have, you can have that. You live in a free country. As long as you have a consistent form of communication with that kid to cultivate a better person. Because your goal as a parent is to create a better person than you. And if that is not your drive when raising that child, not to create some perfect being that can't be matched just so you can say, oh, my kid is so freaking awesome, but to create a person that you would be proud to see in the world, especially in this day and age where so many people are so scared of the youth. They're scared of millennials, which that's what I am, but scared of all these different things. It's like you realize if you just put in the effort to build a strong foundation, you get people like Pat, right? You get people that not only are very structured, hardworking individuals with a lot of passion, but you also get people that are more well-balanced from like a mental health perspective. And I feel like if mental health is going to be a part of the conversation, we need to be realists.
Right. Like what is the stat on like, you know, dudes in prison and their relationship to a father figure?
It's high, whatever it is.
The saddest part is that you actually can't see that anymore. The CDC removed it from their website because it was politically incorrect. A lot of people just were up in arms the fact that it is specified. You know, it was very clear. It's like not having a father in the home, and then they started changing statistics to, well, this is having at least two parents is better than one parent. Yeah, but like the true statistics is like not having that male figure in the home. This is what it's doing to young boys.
Yeah,
right. Just to bring that up to say, like, whatever it was, like, it was between all spitball 70 to 90%.
I remember I heard a stat that was so insanely high.
Yeah, probably closer to that like 90% side as far as like, just to say that, that the fact that it is important, to have that figure in your life. And I think it's cool you're talking about with your stepfather. He came in during a formative time in your life, and like what are some things that you carry with you from your and you could even use both your biological father and your stepfather. What are some things you like carry with you in a good way forward into your marriage and into your how you father now? And whether it's like little example or general philosophy or whatever it might be.
I mean, so much from so many different circumstances. The tough part is that my wife and I are so fortunate and so blessed because my mom watches my daughter 3 days a week, and she was in early childhood education for 36, 38 years, something like that. A very high amount of time to spend with children. And a lot of what I've brought into my parenting has truly been from my mom so far.
Yeah.
My dad taught me a lot. My stepfather taught me a lot in terms of being able to raise a child when they're going through it, when they're really learning who they are, when they are really trying to discover passions and to follow passions, to speak truth in that sense. Now, granted, my stepdad is hard man. And he has his soft parts, but boy, that hard comes quick.
Yeah. I
try so hard to not be a quick to anger father. I refuse to be that father. And I've gotten to a point, where my daughter, again, I've been super blessed. She's incredibly intelligent and she's very good at listening. But there's some days where that all goes out the window because, she's almost 3. And that just is wild to me. But I don't know, man. My biological father, what have I brought in? I've brought a lot of things not to do into my marriage in particular. A lot of how I model who I am as a husband comes from what is the polar opposite of how my dad was when I was a kid? Because I know there was a time before I came along, before my dad had some pretty serious mental stuff happen to him overseas. He went through a lot, and he was a completely different man prior to that.
Right.
And I have to remind myself of that sometimes, of like the man that my mom met, that my angel of a mom fell in love with, was a good man.
Mm-hmm.
And that man still exists, but a man thrown through 7 circles of hell is not going to return the same man.
Mm-hmm.
And you should not anticipate that man to return.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that is weird for us and really beautiful for my mom, because what I've brought into my marriage is I will never say a bad word to my child about my wife ever, period, end of story, ever.
Amen, dude. Amen.
There is no reason. There is no reason for me to have an argument in front of my child, I believe. I'm a grown-ass man and I can handle how I speak to people, and I sure as heck can handle how I speak to my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And if my wife and I need to have a discussion, we will have that discussion separate from where my child is. Not that I don't want my daughter to know that we fight, or my future children to know that we fight.
Right.
We don't fight often because we communicate really well, but I'll tell you what, when we do have discussions, I want our kids to know that, first of all, as a man, this is how you treat a woman.
Right.
There's no substitute. This is how you treat a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And as a wife and as a woman, this is how you treat a man.
Yeah.
I have a partnership with my wife that if it wasn't for my wife, how I would parent would be a lot more strict. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd be a lot harder on my 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Saying that out loud sounds insane. But I think that what she's cultivating in our daughter is the ability to choose and to speak and to be independent for herself at a very young age. And there is going to be some backfires.
That'll be nice for you when she's 16, right?
That's what I'm thinking.
Like, what have we done?
So I'm still behind closed doors, I am the iron fist in that house. And Adley knows I'm the iron fist in that house. And my daughter knows that, and to me, if I can take the best pieces of my stepfather, the best pieces of my biological father, and literally most everything besides my mom's political views, and tuck them into a little box and give that box to my daughter as she grows up so she can pass that on and to any future children, that's my goal.
Yeah.
If I can do that, I've won,
Yeah.
But yeah.
You got a question, Pat?
I do have one. I have that kind of moves us away from this, but if you have something else that's in this same vein,
Before we move over, I would say the thing I'm most curious is like a specific example, a specific lesson that you can recall. Whether actually, let's just make it hard on you.
Yeah,
right?
please do.
I would like to hear a specific thing you learned after becoming a dad that you realize is something you learned from your stepfather, and a specific thing after becoming a dad that you kind of learned and implemented after becoming a dad that you learned from your biological dad. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
from both of them, something that you only realize upon becoming a father that now you're like, all right, I'm gonna bring that into fatherhood. It's all right if it's like a what not to do from either of them or whatever it is, but I am just curious of like, how when you become dads,
some epiphanies start happening.
Yeah, I imagine things change. I'm not a dad, but I just, I imagine like having that experience. There's like a, oh shit.
What's Kendrick Lamar say? This shit's hard. I think I learned that from both of them.
Yeah.
In like a combined sense, but from my dad, gosh dang, great question. From my biological father, what I've taken is, and again, this is no fault of his own, but what I've taken is be present, like just be there,
like just be in the room,
and I was a youth pastor. I was like a youth person a long time ago. And during that time, it was the same mentality of, I'm trying to help these kids get through a really tough part of their life. I just need to show up. I need to show up. I need to go and be there and see them. They need to see me. And that's like, even though my daughter is very young, that's kind of the theory that I'm kind of pressing forward with. Just mostly because there was so many questions I had when I was a kid that I never got to ask. I'm such a loner now. Like getting me here was, even though I said yes really quickly, it's a lot of anxiety for me to leave my home. You know, like I really love being home.
Yeah.
But from my stepdad, I think one thing in particular that I think about a lot when I think about my stepdad is your hard work will pay off, but it's going to feel like hard work in the time that you're doing it. Because guess what, dickhead? It's hard work.
Right.
Like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to supplement a thought to make this easier? You can't.
And these things like aren't even fully developed until they're like 22,
No.
25.
And even then, have you talked to a 25-year-old recently?
Yeah.
I mean, but here's the thing. I think that in that sense, my stepdad in particular has given me so many things moving forward that I want to implement. There's one thing in particular that my dad has implemented a lot throughout my life. And then I found out later is actually kind of like a study that doctors perform to see, you know, how kids think and their decision-making abilities. But I remember we were moving this is going to sound so weird. We were moving pipe. We were moving irrigation pipe from one end of a field down to the bottom end of the field where we were going to store it for the season and replace that pipe with some new pipe. And so we're in a ditch digging out this pipe and running it, or putting it in a truck and like trying to load it in the truck and drive it down and drop it off. And my dad was like, I bet him, I was a little cocky, 16-year-old kid. And I was like, I bet I could pick up one of these massive, I think it was like a 10 foot PVC pipe that was super thick. I mean, it was the size of it's a big grate like that you're putting in a massive trench,
Right.
To irrigate a field. And I was like, I bet before you can finish loading up these like last two things with my brother and get it in the truck and drive it down, I bet I can run this myself all the way down, drop it off before you guys even get the truck there. So he bet me, he was like, I will give you right now, I think it was $10. It was some like small amount of money, but it was just running a pipe. Yeah, I think it was $10. He was like, I'll give you $10 right now, or in a year, I'll give you 100. I was like, I'll take the 100. And he's like, really? I was like, yeah. So you better believe it. In a year to the day, I came up to, I was like, okay, where's my money? Like, you best be handing that kit. And that to me is like, that's a tale, or really like a kind of a parable that I want to bring into my daughter's lives of, hey, this is how we do things. We do things with the end goal in mind. We are not reactionary. And this is probably why my family is not very materialistic. We're not materialistic. Like nothing about us says that we have to own something or show something off to show our wealth. I make really solid money and I do really well in my job. And to me, it's like, I think I showed up in a hoodie and Fabletics pants today because what I was taught in my life is the work that you put in on a daily basis at your job and the work you put in with your family is the only two outcomes you're looking for. It does not matter what anybody else in the world views you as or sees you as long as you are a good human being who cares and cultivates and really tries to build a culture, you're going to do just fine in this life. Just don't make enemies.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I learned from my biological father.
Nice.
Don't make enemies.
Right on.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
You'd mentioned that you're starting to reconnect with your dad. So we've talked some about the shortcomings when he was a young father, which is funny. One concept that is one of the epiphanies I've had as a dad, in a way too, is that like when I had my son, my dad was basically the same age that I was when I had my kid, and just how much I'm still figuring out life. Like, and I'm a human in process. I'm someone figuring out life. I'm somebody going through hard things, unknowns. trying to make ends meet, trying to find my way in the world. In that same way, like when we have kids, or when you're a kid, you view your parents as like a concrete individual.
Mhm.
This is dad, who he knows everything, he can lift everything, he's in charge, and you don't see them as this is a 20-something-year-old person who is still learning a lot in life. And so, like, all that to say, like, when your dad had you, he was still learning. Like, he was just a person going through life, like you said, he had his own issues, his own hardships, his own trials in life, and he was still this person who was figuring out the world around him. And so now today, you mentioned that there's some reconnection going around, I think, around especially now you have a daughter, and maybe he's taken interest in that fact that he's a grandpa. Yeah. So, like, tell us what that's like around. How's it been hard? How's it been good? And really, hopefully, how has it been restorative or healing, if it has been?
Yeah. It's been kind of weird, man, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of and I don't like, and I guess the hardest part is a lot of the stuff I haven't actually figured out with my dad.
Right.
So a lot of the stuff I don't feel like super comfortable digging into without actually like sitting down man to man and having a conversation with him. Mm-hmm. But like, I think kind of an odd thing for us is the realization that my wife is a third party viewer of all this stuff, right? Like, she's been with me for 14 years. She sees what I don't see. She sees my family from a completely different light. Mm-hmm. There's no, heart-shaped goggles on her for my family. And she loves my family. They embraced her from point break, and she has very much embraced them. In fact, I'm 1,000% sure she likes 3 of my family members more than she likes me.
Yeah.
Including my mom and my older brother. Man, having a daughter was trippy because, one, I didn't want to be that new toy that my dad could show off to his new girlfriend, and that comes with a lot of depth of, again, with stuff with my dad that I have not sat down and had the opportunity to speak with him with. So I won't dig too much into that comment, but, that was like a real thought for me, is like, what is this? Like, you were so much not around when I was a kid, but now and it was crazy how much it developed too. So like for you, Pat, like when you had your son, right? Like, your thought process probably never even considered the fact of, do I even want to introduce my daughter to my dad?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a trippy ass thing to think about. Right. And I just remember, knee-jerk reactions are very much a part of, men's cultures in particular, but human culture. And, my first knee-jerk reaction when my wife told me she was pregnant was of like, clearly I had a lot of thoughts before this, but I had a thought of, should we invite my dad to the baby shower? And my wife would, hey, that's up to you. Like
that. I just got to commend her for that then.
Oh man.
Because I almost, like, right before you said that, I was like, oh dude, what did she say? Because there's a million things you think stereotypically wives are going to say.
Yeah.
Especially when they're about to have, it's their baby. It's in their belly.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And for her to say it's up to you is like, I think that's huge.
Guys, we could do us in particular could do an entire podcast on how we could do hours and hours of B-roll of how awesome our wives are.
Yeah.
Yeah. But my wife did pose a very serious question to me in that whole process, which really helped me lead to the decision of where we're at right now with making sure that my daughter knows my dad. Is she asked me, do you think, man,
it's okay.
She asked me, do you think it's a remotely possible for your dad to hurt your daughter like he hurt you? And in the way that she asked it was very simplistic. It was very much like my wife asked every question that she asked me. And it was just very like, she didn't realize the gravity that came with it. And like really like the depth that I was going to have to fight through, you know, from that single question, how much I was going to have to think about that, you know, and how real of a thought that was that I had never had. And in that moment, I was like, that like ego in me. You were talking a little bit earlier, Pat, about like ego and how that is like, I think this may have been off mic, but it was so profound of like, ego is such a crusher of souls. If you don't let it just go, ego is an animal that is meant to be free and you're supposed to let it just kind of run and do its thing. But we harness it and we try to hold on to it. It's an unrideable bull. It's an unrideable bull that every single human has some way that they try to mount it and ride it. And it's like, no, let go of that. Let go of that like little chip on your shoulder of like, oh, your daddy hurt you. Yeah. So many people's daddies have hurt them in some way or another. And you know what? The better people find fucking way to move past it. They find a way to reincorporate that human being that they came from back into their lives. And I'm not trying to sit out here and say that people that have broken relationships with their dad need to go out and try to heal it and try to fix it. No, that pain is real to you. And if that pain is real, then don't bury that pain to try to fight through something that is too much for you to handle. Your mental health is more important than your relationship with anybody. And if I can get to a point in my life where I can look back and say, you know, my dad hurt me sometimes, you know, that he did it in a sense of he is a man doing what in his mind was the best thing at the time.
Right.
And how am I supposed to hate him for that? So to answer your question, all the way up until, because my daughter was born smack dead right at the beginning of the pandemic. You know this very well.
Yeah.
I mean, she wasn't born smack dead, but yeah. Okay.
No, she was born smack dab.
There we go.
She was born the first week of the pandemic.
Yeah.
That we were like officially home from the office.
The day of the lockdowns.
The day of the lockdowns.
Good old March 2020.
Dude, it was insane. It was insane because, you know, I mean, a lot of stories for that birth, but my daughter was born. We got her back home. We are isolated for the first 6 months of her life. No communication. People would be dropping us meals off on our front porch and then leaving. You know, even my mom didn't get a chance to meet my daughter who lives, you know, 4 or 5 miles away from us. Didn't get a chance to meet my daughter for almost 8 months after she was born. Renee, my wife's family, didn't get an opportunity to meet my daughter until around the same time. And that to me was not very painful because I knew that it was a matter of time and this is going to be okay. We're all okay. It's not a huge deal. But for my wife, for Broomhilda, that was tough.
Yeah.
That was real tough. And yeah, I don't know. I think that the pandemic in particular changed my perspective on having my father involved in my daughter's life and how much I was going to forgive, but not forget. And the forgiveness has definitely taken a lot more hold than the forgetting. It's hard for me to forget what I've gone through. It's hard for me and my siblings to forget what we've gone through. And we talk about it.
Yeah.
We're grown. We are all going through the same mental stuff in some way or another, and we all communicate. We know in what ways we were hurt, whether by somebody in our family or somebody not in our family or by our dad or whoever else. Like, we know how we've been hurt and we share that with each other, and we know that we are solid as a unit. And my siblings support what I'm doing with my daughter and how I'm introducing her to my dad. And if they're on board and my wife's on board, I'm chill. Like, that's good to me. So, yeah.
That's good stuff. Is there any? I think we're close to wrapping up here in a second.
Yeah,
but I
guess
wanted to give.
I have a
you a
segment
second.
I want to make sure we do.
Yeah,
especially since this is our first one.
Segments.
So there is. All right, so a couple bits. Yeah, you know, I also think about how I'm going to introduce my kids to my grandfather. I mean, to their grandfather, I think I'm just gonna put a magnifying glass with a petri dish in the garage, and I'm just gonna be, hey, you guys, kids, you want to go visit Granddad? And I'm gonna walk them out there, and I'm gonna do it when they're old enough to have a memory.
I love it so much.
That way they're like confused, and then they get out of the garage and they're just so disappointed, and then they like tell other kids about it. So you just got. I was holding on to that one for a minute, and I was trying to keep it together, but Carl laughing broke me, dude.
You've just got a sea monkey.
Yeah, just like
that's exactly
sea monkey and a Where's Waldo hat.
I think my favorite thing. I think I was thinking about it too. Here's the weird thing. My brain thinks of this stuff in like comedy skits from The Office.
Of course.
I think I would just like gonna like pat it. The magnifying glass like on the top, be like, "Hey pops, how you doing?" And like accidentally knock it off and just have a break and be like, "Oh shit, father no, guys, go get a dustpan quickly, glue, we can fix him." Anyways, serious note though, I just had to let that one out. I was holding on to it, didn't want to forget. I want to have a bit in honor of one of my favorite books. This is, of course, a bathroom book, and it is a book that I have read through cover to cover probably 3 times now since I've owned it, and it's called Shit My Dad Says.
Okay.
And it's just, the whole book is just full of like, each chapter has about a 1-page intro to some context, and then it's just all framing the quote of what like his dad's about to say, of like the context. And then just letting that quote rip. And it's awesome. It's one of my favorite books. If you love reading books while you're on the toilet, look up Shit Your Dad Says. We're not sponsored, but I tell you what, it's giving me enough joy. Someday. And it's giving a lot of friends joy too. Like, people come over to the house and they're like, "Dude, that book is hilarious. I love that freaking book." I've had people try to buy it from me. Like, "I will give you $10 for that book right now." I'm like, no, go buy it on your own. I'm keeping that. Like, but anyways, so I kind of want to do a segment in honor of that book where I just give our guest a moment to just be like, "Here's some shit my dad said," some shit my dad says that's crazy, that I think is hilarious. And, it no pressure, because it doesn't need to be funny to everybody.
Yeah.
And there can be context for it. There doesn't need to be context. But I just think in my experience, especially with father figures, they say some pretty crazy shit.
Bro.
And sometimes it's like, sometimes they think they're dropping wisdom. And like, as a kid, as an adult, I look back and I'm like, what the fuck were they saying, dog? Unhinged. So anyways, I want to give Carl a moment here, go through, give us some shit your dad says.
I mean, my dad has a lot of quotes. He's got a lot of he's very much a, 6 to 1, half dozen of the other type of guy. A lot of colloquialisms in our house.
Yeah.
More to one way to be a dead horse. More what comes to mind is like stories. So we were talking earlier about, the race factor, right? One of my favorite stories, and this is very much the humor we had, my siblings and I have always had with our dad. And this was him in his way of making us comfortable with, hey, listen, we're different. We get it. It's not a huge deal. Like, we're beyond this.
Yeah.
And one time I grew up on a farm. We were working constantly. Our summers we would get done with school and we would work all summer. And one time we were digging a ditch, which is just so much like a main vein in so many of my stories. We were digging a trench and we were in deep. I think we were to dig this specific trench because we were putting in some, again, it was that same irrigation ditch that we were digging around, but we were putting in some like entrances, like because there's a pathway over the irrigation ditch into my parents' driveway. So we have to like basically build a support structure so people can drive over that without breaking the irrigation pipe. And so we're in there, we're digging deep. My brothers and I are in there, all 3 of us, I think, or maybe just me and my middle brother, because apparently it was us a lot. I think it was just me and my middle brother and my dad. And we're digging this trench. My brother and I have our shirts off. My dad gets out of the hole for a second. He's drinking some water, and our neighbor rolls up, and he's probably on a horse or a tractor. It's just very country. And he rolls up and he's talking to my dad, and we've known this guy for forever. We'll call him Sandy McDuckstain because he's, Sandy McDuckstain.
Yeah.
And Sandy rolls up and he's talking to my dad, He's like, what you got the boys doing out today? And he was like, well, if this was the 1800s, I'd have them doing free labor. But of course, it was the face that Sandy gave, who again he's a good old boy, but he's a Colorado good old boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it hit just ghost white. My brother and I just start cracking up in the hole with
So
our show
funny.
because, that's so much of like, that is some super like unhinged, like definitely don't say that shit nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
It's acknowledgement.
it's acknowledgement of like what's going on.
Yeah.
It's meta, dude. It's like a
Boomer
it's meta that you can only understand and find funny and appropriate if you have like a loving kindredness and like history.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's very much that inside joke that probably was definitely not meant for old Sandy. And
So funny. Though.
So my dad does voices for everything.
Uh-huh.
So he does voices for our dogs
Mhm.
in particular. So these two little Shih Tzus growing up, they always
like
had
to impersonate him or when he talks to him.
all of the above,
Okay.
Everything.
Yeah.
all the above, full ass conversations
Yeah.
that he has with these dogs. And he's a big guy. Like he's a big farm boy, and he's talking to these little lap Shih Tzus. It's just like the image of my stepdad is so like wholesome and manly.
Mhm.
It's what I truly, when I hear people talk about masculinity, because I do in my ideology and kind of how I form my opinions, I do think there is such thing as what is referred to nowadays as toxic masculinity. I think that exists.
Yeah, there's 100%.
It's very
There's
clear.
good guys and there's bad guys.
1,000%. And that's how you break it up.
Mhm.
But then there is positive masculinity.
Right.
And these are from, I'm lucky enough to have spent a little bit of time with Pat's father, and to have gotten into some pretty deep conversations with him. And that is masculinity. That is a man.
Mhm.
And that's how I view my stepdad in particular, is like, that is a man. This is what manhood is. This is what the American man is supposed to be. This lighthearted nature with a work ethic.
Hell yeah, dude.
And that's the father I am. And that's the father I'm going to remain being, because even with a broken, quote unquote, broken childhood, minus a father for a while, I still had a very strong mother. I had a very strong support system in my family. And then I got a very strong stepfather. So in theory, guys, I'm, all aces. I just, figuring out this relationship with my dad is the next big step, and how we can grow this and cultivate this into learning who he is. Cause I don't know anything about my dad, y'all.
Yeah.
He truly is a ghost man. He is a ghost man. He will appear and he will disappear. And that's how it goes.
Is he, this is on a comedic light note.
Yeah.
Really not supposed to be serious. But did you ever see the movie Major Payne?
Yeah. One of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh, it's so freaking good, dude. Does your biological dad ever have like major pain moments? Like, or do you remember them from childhood where he'd like say something and realize he wasn't talking to like a grown man in the military, but he was talking to you? Like, I always think about the scene Major Payne telling the story to little Tiger.
Bedtime story.
Yeah, and like and a little chugga chugga, and then Bubba, you ain't got no legs, Bubba.
ain't got no legs.
And this blood, just snot coming out of his nose.
Crawling up that hill. Chugga. Oh man.
But
yeah.
that's always like the immediate frame of reference that I have in mind when I hear about people like, yeah, my dad's like in the military and he's fought, and I'm just like, oh, so your dad's Major Payne?
My dad has no idea how to talk to kids.
Yeah.
He has zero idea how to talk to kids. We didn't get spanked when I was a kid. We got kicked. So like, seriously, I'd take a judo kick to my chest.
Wow. Holy smoly.
Yeah. But I would see my dad so rarely that it was all fun dad mode. Like, he knew that my stepdad and I had the football. He knew that that was a huge part of my life and that I was probably going to end up being a football player at some point. So when I was 15, he took me to the national championship to watch University of Texas beat USC in California. One of the greatest college football games of all time.
Yeah.
And I was there. I was in the stands because my dad, on a whim, decided that he wanted to take me. And that was I talked briefly about like the competing nature.
Yeah.
My dad always wanted to one up, but he just didn't know what I wanted. He didn't know what I needed.
Oof. Yeah, that's an uphill battle for for not being present and stuff. Like it makes sense of the like competing dad stuff, but like that. I mean, what you said, not being aware of what you want, and makes it a lot harder to outdo your stepdad.
You better believe it.
But okay, all right. But do you have any memories of like your biological dad saying something where like even as a kid you were like, damn, that was a little much. Like I don't know if I was supposed to hear, or like do you remember any memories of him like having like a oh shit like expression where he's like,
yeah,
maybe I should have said that.
I mean, again, I didn't spend enough time around him to really like learn his lingo via osmosis, but driving from he was living in El Paso, Texas when I was a kid, so we would drive out to see him every once in a while, usually once a summer we'd go see him.
Okay.
And we were driving back from El Paso one time. He was driving us back to Colorado, and he turned on, I can't remember what the album was. It may have been the Marshall Mathers LP.
Oh, wow.
When it first dropped, my very first taste of hip hop music, my true first taste of hip hop music.
I'm having a moment here where I'm just thinking of like Darkest Night Navy SEAL just losing his mind to the Marshall Mathers,
which is
EP.
so weird for us because it's like a 13 hour drive in between, or maybe even longer than that, in between here and El Paso.
Oh my gosh.
And we used to drive in silence because my dad needed silence.
Sure.
And I didn't understand that till I was much older, but I was silent. I did not speak. So when we had music turned on, one, it was a treat, but two, this is something that in my WASP home that I was being raised in, this was not music I was allowed to listen to. And boy, that changed my life. That moment,
dude,
changed my life.
I remember the first time I heard that album too, dude. I remember
life
like
changing,
clear as night. Yeah, I was literally in the car with an older stepbrother on my way to go to Blockbuster to rent a movie. And I remember
such a
the moment I heard,
sentence.
the moment I heard "Lose Yourself," I was just like, "What is this?" I lost my mind, dude. Yeah. But did he have like an oh shit moment in the car where he looks around? And he's like, "Oh."
When my brother called him out for the music he just turned on.
Your brother actually like
my older brother was like, whoa, because he's an older brother.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, I don't know about this, and my dad was like, no, it's totally fine. I mean, my dad had oh shit moments all the time. Like one time we were going hunting. I had just gotten my hunter safety course. We were going like jackrabbit hunting out in the middle of West Texas, and we're walking past these bushes, and my second brother, kind of my middle brother-ish, was like walking past this big bush, and my dad was like, hold on just a second. And he walks up with a shotgun and just sticks it in the bush and fires, and sticks the shotgun in there and just out on the road flings this like 6 foot long rattlesnake.
Oh wow.
Did not hear the son of a bitch rattle.
Yeah.
Didn't see it. Didn't know how he saw it. It was just, and that was the kind of stuff. That's more of how I saw my dad. Is like this unreal
Walker Texas Ranger
that was never around. It was very much like, in my head up until I was like 18, my dad was a superhero.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Straight up.
Wow, man. Hey, thanks for sharing that. I know that's just something that I always think of. And when we do a mom's one, because we're going to do a mom's one, I'm always in for. Dude, I'm out my mom so hard of all the shit she said, dude. Because my mom
has so many quotes.
Yeah, exactly, dude. Anyways, Pat, anything you want to give and review or discuss before we wrap it up?
Yeah, no, I think I was going to just say, thanks for coming on here and sharing stuff. And known you for a long time, and so it's good to hear things I've never even heard about your story. And I think that this stuff you're talking about is, like you said at the very beginning, it's not an uncommon story to lots of kids and lots of adults, to have similar experiences with their family and with their fathers. And so I think, when I watch you as a dad and the way you interact with your kid, I think that I see those values come out, and I think you do live those things out. And so, yeah, I think that I appreciate the time you've taken this evening to come sit down and chat with us and let people know a little bit of your story, and, share stuff that's not necessarily comfortable to talk about. And yeah, we appreciate that.
I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think the biggest thing that I feel like the potential of this series is just for other young men, young fathers to have healing.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think like your story is going to be something that can provide, hope and healing, especially for like, if we got the listener out there who's like 16-year-old in your shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how much would that have meant to you at the time to hear you?
An awful lot.
Right. And so the only thing I want to encourage you, Carl, speaking statistically, is that your stepfather is a really good man. You should, I'm sure you tell him all the time, but you should tell him again, because statistically you're supposed to be a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to not be in your daughter's life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like the fact that you are the way you are, and I, echo what Pat says, seeing you weekly and stuff at church, dude, your stepfather is a good dude, and that's made you, or helped you at least, become a really good dude as well. So give you this moment here for like any kind of closing thoughts, anything that you feel like you want to kind of leave as a note to kind of your story and what you shared here, encouragement for people out there listening. I'll say this for those listening: if you got other things that you wish we would have asked Carl, leave it in a comment on YouTube or comment in a review for Spotify, whatever it is. And we will try to get you those answers. As long as they're appropriate questions, of course.
I'll answer anything. Shoot.
Cool. Hey, it's on record. But yeah, Carl, go ahead. Leave us with some wisdom, because your words are going to be the final words here.
Parenthood is simple if you just try. Just try. This generation is on pace to either be the greatest or the worst. And it's up to us as parents and future parents and people that are in the position to speak and teach children. We're in the position to raise that next generation of what we view America becoming and the world becoming. And that to me is very important. And I will end on this. Support education, support your educators. Make sure that anytime you have the chance to support somebody that is teaching children, that is spending time with them and is choosing that path, support them in everything you can do, whatever you can give them, whatever you can do to support them, support them. Go and be a teacher. Go and take a day off of work and sit in your kid's classroom. Go show up. It's not that hard. The impact it will have will be timeless. Your benefits that you will reap will far outweigh anything you ever invest in. I am the father of a 3-year-old. This is just simple stuff I have viewed from the best parents and the best people that I've interacted with, and how their parents raised them and what they found as the most important things to them. Show up, be there, try, have a backbone, but most importantly, go Broncos.
Thanks for tuning in. If you love this episode, drop us a review. If you have qualms or comments, leave us a voicemail on our website. While you're there, check out our latest news, merch, and deals from our sponsors. Till next time, Ken.